So I read a while back an article about agnosticism, which basically means, I don't know if God exists or doesn't, kind of hasn't been proven either way, and how that's a very empowering position, because if you embrace agnosticism, then you can try on different points of view and different beliefs and see what that does for you. This is very similar in concept to what Edward de Bono did with his thing called Poe. So he came up with this word Poe, which means, just for the sake of a hypothetical thought experiment, what would fall out if this was the case? So you say Poe, I don't know, cars run upside down or something crazy. I mean, that's a ridiculous example, but it doesn't matter. The whole point is it can be ridiculous, because you just want to see what movement it gives to the thought process, rather than making a kind of serious suggestion. So it doesn't have to justify itself, it's just for the sake of movement. So, cars run upside down, what does that mean? Maybe you could have, I don't know, what could fall out of that? You've got, I'm imagining the wheels are now up in the sky, and what can you do with those wheels? Maybe some kind of conveyor belt. I've no idea where it falls out. And that's the point, really, is you don't need to justify it. So that's one thing. So then there's this idea of, the kind of scientific worldview, which is often misunderstood, I think, by amateur scientists. It isn't saying, the scientific worldview isn't a set of beliefs which are true. Basically, the science thing is the method for building models of how things, best working model that we have at the moment. So if you're looking at, the behavior of particles, you have a model and it has a good predictive power, so that's great, but we hope you don't confuse the model for what the actual nature of the underlying reality is, right? And we had a discussion about this recently, and I was talking about this idea of blue pixies, and I would say at a certain level of resolution, if we can't get a better resolution in what's going on beneath a certain, level of actual truth rather than the level of the model that we make, then for all we know, these particles could just be blue pixies riding a bicycle, like an electrons, And it sounds really silly and trite, but actually it's a really important point. So what I want to go on from there is this idea of a thing called the golden thread, right? So the golden thread, sometimes if we're depressed or, life's a bit boring and we feel a bit stuck, it can feel like there's not a lot of meaning, there's not a lot of sense to the universe. And I think this is quite an inherent kind of fallout from the materialist worldview, which people often think is the scientific worldview. So we can have this kind of sense of meaninglessness and kind of randomness and chaos, and nothing really makes sense. And then most of us have probably had times in our life when things have really made sense, and there seems to be this natural flow, and you get all these kind of synchronicities, and you meet someone and they mention something else and you go and pursue that, and suddenly there's this kind of whole world of new opportunities and new enjoyment of life, opening up for these apparent coincidences, right? So in the spirit of this kind of agnostic Poe experiment, what if there is a golden thread, right? So you don't have to renounce your scientific worldview, but just as a thought experiment, what if there is this kind of golden thread and things happen for a reason, and maybe in retrospect that reason makes a lot of sense, and of course that could be a cognitive bias, some kind of retro whatever bias, which I can't remember the name of, kind of imputing meaning after the event. Could be, but what if it's not? What if there is genuinely this kind of, I don't know, this kind of intelligence in the universe, like, the Force in Star Wars, or, the Chi field, or the Tao in Taoism, What if there is this kind of cosmic intelligence? And if you're in tune with that, then you do tend to have these kind of quite, what's the word, kind of interesting and useful and meaningful experiences in life. That's an interesting thought experiment, and it probably is going to help with your well-being, how good you feel about your life, if you believe a kind of meaningful universe, versus what I would call possibly a loyalty to the false god, ironically, right? Hopefully you can see the irony, the false god of materialist reductionism. So I think a lot of people would deny themselves the possibility of believing in this kind of meaningful, use the force loop, kind of, fun, enjoyable universe, because, their loyalty to the god of, everything is completely inanimate, obviously there's no meaning, it's just this mechanistic world, it won't let them do that. So I would say that's potentially quite irrational to presuppose meaninglessness, to presuppose a mechanical, unconscious, unintentional universe with certainty, to the extent that you don't even try to see if there is a kind of more meaningful and more kind of more meaningful, more fun, more playful, more abundant way of understanding our universe and our place in it.